Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, February 24th, 2022. I'm Kev Laramie, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, interesting show today, Duane, as we break down all the Canadian team's roster heading into the first weekend of the season. We will also break down the results from last night's CCL. Montreal moving on and exercising a demon at the Olympic Stadium. But first, we start with somber news in Europe when Russia invades Ukraine, and we'll talk about the soccer ramifications. And it's an interesting aspect, and Duane is shaking his head. And yes, who would have thought that politics would start the headlines on Soccer Today?
Well, I was just sorry. I don't mean to laugh, and if anyone's out there, this is very serious stuff, so I'm not laughing. It's just like surreal, right? Like that we're starting a show called Soccer Today with, oh yeah, Russia invaded Ukraine. Like, come on, man. Look, we've been doing this for a long time, and there was a time when we would try to be, well, we're always going to be trying to be respectful of the news, but we kind of took the view that we should offer people a distraction rather than dive into stuff like that. So we're not going to dive into the geopolitics of this. You didn't come here for it, but we can't have to acknowledge it because it's real and it's throwing things into a loop. Like, you know, with the UEFA Champions League final has been moved now, as we've talked about the last couple of days. There's a game this afternoon at 3 p.m. between Zenit St. Petersburg and Real Betis, which I'm not sure should take place, but we're going to see at 3, and then there's one more team still in Europe. So, yeah, we got to talk about it.
Of course, and we haven't talked about this issue enough, I think, about how Shakhtar Donetsk over the last, 8 years now have been also exiled, right? Donetsk being in that part, in that Donbass region that has been contested by Russia at the same time over the last few years, and of course Crimea before that. It's something that's been long in the making, and Duane mentioned it, and we can put it again on your screens if you're watching us via YouTube, which welcome to our show. We entice you to subscribe to our YouTube platform where you can find what I believe, and I'm a bit biased, maybe the most informative soccer podcast in Canada. Champions League final move from Russia, Duane. The UEFA has called an extraordinary meeting for Friday, February 25th. Of course, and that is after the call of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, saying, I think it is inconceivable that a major international football tournament can take place in Russia after the invasion of a sovereign country. We know that has actually taken place since last night, and it has been made not official, but multiple sources like ESPN are mentioning that tomorrow it will be announced UEFA Champions League final will be moved, and like Duane mentioned, St. Petersburg is playing today in the Europa League, and CSKA Moscow is in the round of 16, right, of Europa League 2, so
go ahead. Interject. The format changed this year, so the teams that won their group in the Europa got the bye through this round, where the play-down, the teams that dropped down from the Champions League are playing each other. I looked in the Europa or UEFA Conference League, which is a thing that exists if you don't know, but I didn't see any Russian teams in that. I haven't followed it closely up to now. But yeah, look, I mean, the game today, I think that Real Betis will probably solve the problem for UEFA. They're already leading the tie.
And you know what? They're probably going to put their foot to the throat. Sorry to interject, but I hope so. That's what I'm really hoping for. Like a 5-0 win today. The entire Western world betting on Real Betis.
Well, yeah, and exactly. And perhaps even some of the, Zenit St. Petersburg players maybe not necessarily being all that enthused about it either. You never know, because they're going back to an unstable environment. But if you're like Spartak Moscow is still in the draw. They're going to draw a team. Do you want to draw them? Should they be taken out? I don't know. I do know. I think they should be.
Yeah. And
whether they will be is what I don't know.
Of course, then you will win by my 2 favorite word in the English dictionary. Default. Exactly. But on that note, we're gonna now, there's no perfect segue, so we do send our thoughts, I guess that's all we could do for now, to anybody affected on either side of this conflict, because It's not good for anybody. Let's be frank here. Anywhere in the world, this is not a good place to go. Let's now talk about CONCACAF Champions League. Last night at the Olympic Stadium, which was supposed to take place on Tuesday, but took place last night. Montreal with an emphatic victory, 3-0 versus Santos Laguna. Duane, Montreal exercised a demon 13 years in the making. Santos Laguna, a shell of themselves. Maybe the worst Mexican team I have ever seen play. But Montreal came out to play with a 3-0 victory at home against their old rival. What a performance by Kyoto Mihailovic and even the young midfielder Ismael Kone, who scored on his first start with the big club.
And I've heard a lot of hype about that Kone. He seems to be maybe one of those guys that, you know, the sort of hidden gems that you find out of nowhere. Like he kind of, I mean, maybe those close to. I'm sure if Tristan was here, he would know what we're talking about because he knows all the kids that are down there. But Tristan Love there. Anyway, but it's he's been doing very well. No, look, that wasn't your Herculez Gomez's Santos that we saw out there, right? Like, not at all.
Not at all. Wow. Just take a look at the statistics as you see on your screen. Being a statistician, I do like to support my words with numbers. And 10 shots, 6 on target for Montreal, 58% possession, which is not even representative of the actual game. Late in the game, Santos Laguna got more of the ball that actually influenced these numbers. It was closer to 62, 63, and then late in the game, it moved a bit. So I would give Montreal more than 58% possession when you think about the game, the control of the game itself. Good numbers for the passes and passing accuracy. It was a difficult night for Santos Laguna with a makeshift back line. Or was it really a makeshift back line? Was it really a makeshift roster or just a terribly put together team with their coach missing? He was in isolation, of course, and that does bring some sort of explanation to why they were so disorganized. But Duane, we're going to talk about Montreal and they deserve to be talked about a whole lot. We'll break down their roster and their starting 11 in a minute. But Santos Laguna, they looked terrible last night.
You know, 100%. Like I made a joke earlier, but no, that didn't look like a Mexican team. That looked like more like a, you know, I'm not going to say where because I don't want to be disrespectful, but it looked like a smaller nation's team is what it looked like. They didn't look like they wanted to be there. They didn't look like once they fell that, well, they didn't even fall behind. Once they had that first goal against them and they lost the lead, they just looked disinterested in playing. And look, there's a lot of problems there. In terms from their perspective, they were on bad turf. Well, it's not their perspective. They were on bad turf, but both teams were, right? So it's their perspective that's a bigger issue. They have to fly all the way to Montreal. They're going with their coach. They've got all this stuff. They probably have to go through COVID protocols when they get home, all this stuff that's not very fun. But I mean, they didn't seem interested in playing the CONCACAF Champions League, and that's a strange thing. And look, I came away from watching this game and the Colorado Rapids game where they did lose. And this is ironic considering the Rapids lost, but I came away, I'm at like a 50% possibility that MLS wins this tournament this year because the Mexican teams, I know Colorado wasn't playing a Mexican team, but the MLS teams look like they're up for it. Like they look like they're trying. And Colorado did win the game.
Lost the tie.
Yeah, they lost the penalty shootout. But
exactly.
The Mexican teams just don't look up for it in the same way. Like that gap seems closed, and maybe it's because the tournament's happening a little bit earlier. Maybe it's because, you know, the money's getting closer. Who knows? But and the COVID stuff, like Mexico hasn't been able to. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think you just touched on it. I think it's the COVID stuff, and we talked about it. How here in North America, we had those closed-door tournaments or closed-door games, and games were stopped. But the market, the market of player transfer in and out, the league is not depending on it for the level of play as much as the Liga MX. And that really has been affected by the pandemic, which is why you're seeing a big disparity in Mexican results now and a couple years ago. And if you look at the table itself, you see teams like Tigres is back up there, Cruz Azul also. But I look at teams that, in my mind, were the top of this region just 5 years ago, not even, like Club America, Tigres, Monterrey. Those three teams are nowhere near the top. And Santos Laguna is dead last. And those are just examples of team being affected by what I call the collateral damage of the pandemic, which is not like directly the pandemic. It's just the transfer market of the teams was affected, and the lack of income that actually dictate the transfer market affected the roster building of these teams.
Yeah, I would suspect, and I'd have to look closer at Liga MX to know this for sure, but I would suspect that the movement was less, and it had a lot to do with what you just said. The teams just didn't have as much money. That's sort of a little agreement. The gentleman's agreement in Mexico, it's been challenged a little bit, so they can't sort of shift talent to the top teams. And one of the biggest differences in talent, and this is a difficult, nuanced conversation to have with people when they're saying, oh, the MLS sucks. It's like one of the reasons it's very difficult to look at international results and use them as a measure of what MLS is because MLS does not have super clubs. They have teams that are very good and are traditionally near the top, like Seattle, say, or Toronto until recently for a few years. But those teams aren't super teams in the same way as they are in other leagues. They don't have all of the best talent. And for a long time, Mexico had what they called the gentleman's agreement, which they sort of would shift talent to the top 3 or 4 teams, which allowed Club America. It allowed Tigres for a while. It allowed Chivas, going back a decade or so ago, to be very near the top and dominant teams and dominant clubs. We don't have dominant clubs here in this region anymore. And now that the overall spending is dropping across the board and Liga MX is more parity, has more parity itself, that gap between the top clubs and the top clubs, which used to be massive, is smaller. I still think it's there. Like, I've watched Tigres roll into town. Like, that's an operation, but it's not quite this anymore. If you see me on camera, it's more like this.
Yeah, there's a big difference too, and I agree. And we'll break down the roster of Montreal in a second and their starting 11 in our Canadian MLS team preview too. But when I look at Montreal's depth, that's where I think the gap was really bridged between Liga MX and between MLS teams like CF Montreal and that's a TAM and GAM. It's a depth, right? Montreal has one of the most deep team in the defense department and other departments too. And the advantage of a Mexican roster, the Liga MX roster, for that aspect, is a lot smaller now. Which brings me to the lineup of CF Montreal last night. I quite enjoyed the starting 11 and the decisions taken by Wilfried Nancy last night. Sébastien Breza, at one point, I thought it was The Rock in net, Duane. He went for a ball. I don't know what time it was, but he cleared a ball, came back, and when he cleared the ball, he almost tackled the Mexican player, came back, another Santos Laguna player confronted him, and he stood up, flexed a bit, the Mexican player started running on the other side. Yeah, Sébastien Breza, he's a good goalkeeper, and he has a calming presence, and so far, while we've seen him play twice in the Champions League, and the fact that Montreal went out of their way to bring him back this offseason, instilling a new loan for him, well, it tells you what the players think about Sébastien Breza also.
No, I know exactly the play that you're talking about there. And it was an honest play for the ball. It was probably a foul because he went through him, but it wasn't like malicious. And that play told you a lot about the game. The Mexican team's flopping down and they're angry because they're frustrated and they're losing. And he's so much bigger than the Mexican player. And even when they came in for the pushing and shoving after, it was like,
no.
It was like, here's your hockey reference. It was like a midget team coming in to push the bantam team around. Yeah.
You can't teach height. You can't teach height. 6'4" for a goalkeeper any day. You know what? I'll take it. Exactly. It's going to be a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, look, Santos didn't look good, and Montreal did. And we're going to talk in a minute to segue to that, but to Montreal, that means. But yeah, it was a very impressive performance. It was one of the most impressive performances, if I can talk today, that I've seen from CF Montreal in a long time. Well, Montreal franchise in a long time.
Maybe that name could come back in some shape or form one day. One day it could not be that
impact.
far. Miller, Camacho, and Waterman were the backline for Montreal last night as Alistair Johnston came into the game later on. But that's the decision that was taken. And to me, the fact they decided to play Waterman last night and not Corbeau again, maybe there's some injuries I'm not aware of, but maybe we'll see Corbeau start this weekend against Orlando in Orlando on Sunday when Major League Soccer starts their season. It's going to be a fun time, and tomorrow on the show, Duane, you and I will give our season predictions. We'll preview the entire season of Major League Soccer from our unique perspective. And after the break today, we'll break down all the rosters of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, looking at each position and looking at one topic per team that we think is important to talk about. I alluded to it. For me, it's the Montreal defense. But we talked about Kone, Mathieu Choignard, Victor Wanyama, and Lassie Lapalainen were in the midfield for Montreal. Man of the match for me is Georgi Mihailovic. He was good last year, and if this game is indication of his talent this year, Duane, Mihailovic could be the next Carles Hill for this year. Like, he was just behind him last year. Mihailovic could be MVP in 2022 in Major League Soccer.
Yeah, assuming they don't move him in the summer, because
exactly.
Yeah, if he adds goals to his games, like that goal that the second goal, I mean, yeah. He clearly was. If he had an MVP amongst the Canadian teams, which they don't, but we could make one up, it would have been him last year for sure amongst the three Canadian. Although Brian White fans are probably yelling right now at their devices, and we'll talk about him in the next segment. But yeah,
they won't like what we have to say about Brian White, but it's okay.
For the full season, for sure. Look, I came away impressed with Montreal. I came away probably adjusting them up my rankings a little bit. I don't know where I had them yet, because I haven't worked it completely out in my mind, because I've been distracted by other things in the world. But we will by tomorrow. And
that was distracting me a bit this morning and last night. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'll be fully honest with you. I have a lot on my plate in the next few days, and did not need to be drawn into geopolitical conflicts.
No. I was watching German news from 2 a.m. on. So if I look a little tired, that's where I'm at. But
did you see the same journalist that was in like all the other news? Like
the one that did all the languages, yeah.
Philip Crowther, who's taking jobs away from about 12 journalists worldwide.
Yeah, meanwhile, I'm like, I'm loving lessons too on Duolingo, trying to learn just enough French to read tweets.
How do you say horse? Cheval. Horse. That was our Duolingo for the day. Yeah. We'll take a short break. We'll regain our composure. And after the break, Duane and I will break down the roster of every single Canadian teams in Major League Soccer. We'll look at their strength. We'll look at their weaknesses. We'll also look at what's to come. And this is the beginning of our preview for this weekend's Major League Soccer season, starting its 27th campaign on Saturday. But we'll be right back after this short break, right here on Soccer Today.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Before we break down Montreal's roster, all the best to Forge FC, who will take on Cruz Azul tonight in the CONCACAF Champions League, wrapping up the second legs of the round of 16. Also, Seattle Sounders will play Motaga at 10:45 p.m. Turns out that I'm going to have another late night tonight, Duane, I guess, after last night. We're going to break down Comunicaciones in Colorado on another time. It's okay. We don't have to break that down too much. We did do our diligence. And for the last time in this round, Santos Laguna has been eliminated. I will not say this word again until the next time they qualify for the Champions League.
I think they were in last year too, so you might have a chance. I watched the thing to watch with the Rapids game. Two things quick. Minus 16. The novelty of Ice Teca games has worn thin on me now, so it takes a lot of the quality out of the game. The penalty shootout was bizarre. If you just go back and watch just the penalty shootout, I'd recommend that. Colorado, first MLS team. And then there were four. So there you go.
And then they were four. It's time to break down Major League Soccer's Canadian team's roster. It's the beginning of our preview show, the beginning of our look into the strengths and weaknesses of the Canadian teams. And tomorrow we'll look at each standings, my prediction for the East and the West, Duane's prediction. We'll also look at some questions: who wins the Shield, who wins the Cup, trophies. We'll preview and predict the big issues tomorrow. Today we're going to deep dive onto the Canadian teams. And we're going to start with Montreal because we just talked about them in the CCL. And for the CF Montreal, and that's of course as of today, those roster. And of course, the rosters are taken from the respective Major League Soccer website, the official roster as of today. Some of these players might be on their way out, loans, but as of today, which is not yet the official roster on the game day, those are the rosters as of February 24th, 2022. 4 goalkeepers from Montreal. Sebastian Breza, James Pantemis, top 2 here in the depth chart. Jonathan Sirois may be on his way out for loan. Who knows? Logan Ketterer might be on the way for loan. There's 4 keepers. There's 3 spots. Something's got to give.
And they used the CAMPL very well for the loan situation last year. So we'd have to look carefully at the CAMPL rosters, which we will in about a month, to see if anyone needs that. And I suspect that you'll see a lot more loan options. I wonder whether they might even loan to an MLS Next program as well, because there are some opportunities out there. That
let's not forget, though, that Montreal will have a team in the PLSQ this year.
So there's that, too.
So there's also that possibility of seeing Jonathan Sirois maybe play his game there. But that is a step down from the CanPL. So maybe you send Sirois back to Winnipeg, to Valor, and maybe Logan Ketterer becomes your PLSQ goalkeeper.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we saw Joel Waterman play 2 games in this competition already, and fairly decently last night. Coming from the CAMPL, TFC's, we'll talk later, has signed 2 CAMPL players. You know, that league is going to start to become more and more part of the development pyramid. So that's an option there for sure. But yeah, you 4 keepers is at least 1 too many. So you're going to need to get them time.
I agree. But this is where I think it's important to talk of Montreal's depth, and that's at defense. Zoran Bassong, Zachary Broguillard, Rudy Camacho, Gabriel Corbeau, Kishan Ferdinand, Alistair Johnston, Kamal Miller, Robert Thorkelson, Joel Waterman, and Kari Fayao. Those might seem like, there are not a lot of superstars, but let's break it down. Kamal Miller, Alistair Johnston, World Cup qualifying defenders that are regular players in this league and could be regular players in other leagues too. They're growing, they're young, they've known each other now in this system, and that brings a lot of known commodity. Rudy Camacho, they were able to find an agreement and bring him back, and they do have chemistry there. And then you added Gabriel Corbeau, who has a very high upside. I think those 4 will rotate for the 3 center back position, and then you have youth and speed for your flank positions, used interchangeably between defenders and midfielders, from Lassie Lapalainen, Zachary Broguillard to Mathieu Chouanière, depending on what you're looking for in a game-by-game situation. I love the malleability, the way you can interchange these players and how you can adapt that defense for the opponent you're playing against. That is the strong point of this team for me, the back line.
No, you can play 4 or 3 at the back for sure, I think, and that allows you to set up however you like. I mean, you could, and familiarity is what you mentioned there too, and that's a key component to me. And you have a guy coming in, Alistair Johnson, who isn't familiar with the team as a general, but he's familiar with a guy that's going to be standing beside him because he plays with him in the Canadian national team. So that kind of eliminates that.
And Samuel Piet in front of him, who's going to play with him, who knows him too, and Zachary Broguillard to his right. And eventually, before long, Mathieu Chouanière is going to have a shot at the national team level because he's playing so well. So, you're looking at a team of familiarity and the use of Canadian player by a Canadian team in Major League Soccer. Quite impressive.
Yeah, no, Montreal right now is the kings of the Canadians for sure in terms of their players that they have on the roster. I don't think there's much doubt about that. Look, yeah, and what they've done very well, I think, and what Montreal has done quite effectively and quite surprisingly in some ways too, from the outside perspective, is they've kind of developed within a lot more than other clubs. And part of that's by necessity. We all know that they're not a higher spending team, and they do sort of utilize the Serie A connections there with Bologna a little bit. And that's kind of a way to get around a little bit of the stuff that they deal with. But they're effective at it. And they step outside more than most MLS teams. They do step outside the structure and kind of stand alone, which culturally stands to reason. It is Quebec. It is Montreal. They have traditionally stood kind of alone in North America in terms of what they are culturally in the northern part anyway. So from a philosophy standpoint, you can understand why they might be a little more reluctant to just sort of follow the bottom line. Now, that said, when I look at that roster construction and the type of players that have done at the back, it's very much in line with how you ideally want to do it. You have a solid middle and you try and get your speed and flair and take more chances on the outside. So yeah, it is definitely the strength of Montreal. As I've said many times before, bingo card time, you will not win a championship through the defense. Your great uncle, when he was drinking his beer and yelling at Monday Night Football, was wrong. Defense does not win championships. Offense is what wins championships. Statistically speaking, over the years, that is borne out. So you're going to have to find the goals. So perhaps we move forward now.
Yeah, we'll see. Some of them will come from the midfield, of course. The midfield can be summed up with Mihailovic to me, Victor Wanyama, Samuel Piet, and now I guess Rida Zohir and Ismael Kone in the conversation for your defensive midfield. So those are great opportunities and great possibilities for CF Montreal to become solid. And if we progress higher up on the pitch, Mihailovic is unmovable. He is the piece of this team. And now you have maybe the opportunity of having a Kai Kamara bringing experience there. And Romel Kyoto's on fire. And will Joaquin Torres continue to be there? Will you have other opportunities? Will Bjorn Johnson have a redemption season? At this point, it doesn't really matter because it will be Kai Kamara and it's just placeholders until Mason Toye comes back. And the real combination here for Montreal will be Romel Kyoto and Mason Toye. And Kai Kamara and the other options are there for either the future or in a short-term situation to just make sure it stays afloat. But the true combination here is, of course, Romel Kyoto for sure, but Mason Toye probably for the later part of the season.
Mason Toye is the difference between Montreal being a borderline playoff team and being a team fighting for a home playoff game, to me. If he comes in and does what some people think he can, then this is because he's going to score goals and he's going to create goals for other players as well. If that happens, then Montreal is looking at 3-4 seed, maybe even pushing higher if they really, hit lightning in a bottle. It's hard to really say that to go from where they were to all the way to the top, but certainly they're going to jump towards that battle to the middle of the play or to the home playoff dates. But if Toye struggles a little bit, doesn't hit the potential, then they're probably, we'll talk more about this in the full predictions tomorrow, but they're probably more towards that playoff thing. Although I do think that they've improved what we saw yesterday. And that's, if you're in Montreal, you got to like that. They're, of the three Canadian teams right now, they're the one that I would be more likely to put money on this year to do something.
Yeah, I would pick a future of Montreal before I take a future of Toronto or Vancouver. Like, I will not touch Vancouver with a 100-foot pole. Maybe that tells you a little bit of my predictions for tomorrow, but we'll get there. But I think that wraps up our thought on Montreal, and I really wanted to hammer the nail of the defense because I think it's going to be Montreal's probably calling card this year is not necessarily the amount of clean sheet, but winning those close games because of their defense, and that will make a difference. And not conceding late in the game maybe could be the new trope for CF Montreal versus the old one of conceding late in the game. Speaking of trope conceding, let's start about Toronto FC. Let's talk about Toronto and Bob Bradley making a return. Well, he returned. He hasn't really left Major League Soccer. He was in LA. Now he's in Canada, I guess. And this is Toronto's roster as of February 24th, 2022. 4 goalkeepers here too. We'll see if Luca Gavran stays put as a drafted player. Carlos Salcedo's the biggest acquisition in the defense. And I have to say, we'll see. It's a very young defense core, Duane. Outside of Kamar Lawrence and Chris Mavinga, we have a young defense composed of Luke Singh, Lucas McNaughton, and Kedin Chung, who was signed just a couple days ago from Pacific FC. Also, Shane O'Neill in the conversation for defenders for TFC.
Yeah, well, Shane O'Neill came in as a free agent, and I think he'll probably be that sort of third rotation around. But this is a very, the theme of all of TFC's talk today is going to be how thin it is. If you look at the top end and you want to project them to all have the seasons that their best seasons are capable of, then yeah, this is a team, even without the additions that are coming in the summer, that could maybe compete to make the playoffs. But that's a lot to ask for every single player to stay healthy all year and every single player to hit their potential. Mavinga and Salcida, on paper, that's not a bad setup. And O'Neill coming in to back them up occasionally. But it's hard to see them not having a moment where suddenly, who is starting in the middle there? What's going on?
Who's injured? And what do we do now?
Well, look at last year. They had similar problems at the back last year. Look, I'm most excited from the back. I want to talk Chris Mavinga for a while. Who's, in 2017, he was Defender of the Year caliber. and he's gone, it's like a roller coaster. He was up, and he's been going down the hill. The question is whether the addition of another high-quality guy, but a quality guy that takes a lot of chances and likes to push upfield, whether or not that is something that he can get past.
That's okay. While Duane readjusts his camera, and we'll be back with Duane on video.
Yeah, I'm here now. Oh, sorry.
No. There you go. Touch it again. We'll be fine. There we go. But as we continue, and so Mavinga will see that addition. But yes, outside of Mavinga, we'll see if that raises his play. Basically, it's the rising tide that rises all ship. If the new young defenders rises his game, maybe you're back to having a good defense for Toronto.
Yeah, well, good's a strong way to put it. You might come back to have a defense that doesn't make you petrified to watch the games, doesn't make you look, I have been there since day one. Although I have a journalist hat on a lot of times, I still maintain my fandom up there because I think that's important to keep the passion in some level. I will argue that to the day I die. There should be cheering in the press boxes. It makes for better sports reporting. However, it was very difficult to watch that team last year, particularly at the ends, because they were just so porous that you didn't care. Like, you could do something nice, they could get a great goal, and you'd be, this is great, and then 2 minutes later, they'd switch off. And Mavinga struggled so much not having anything consistent beside him. So he, to me, to watch to whether he could step it back up to finish my point before someone interrupted me by calling. This is the problem with using your phone. Then you have to, who calls anymore? Anyway, that's
Text first. And if I don't answer you, don't call. Come on. Okay, Mom? No, I'm just kidding.
Even Mom texts now.
No, but I agree. But when we continue the breakdown of Toronto's roster, defense is a scary part. The midfield. Michael Bradley, of course, captain, once again, of Toronto FC. Jonathan Rosario, Noble Okello, Alejandro Pozuelo, Ralph Prizo-Mbonge, and Luca Petrasso, younger brother of Michael. Of course, Michael, better known as the other side of that slap of Zlatan Ibrahimovic in Major League Soccer. I will forever be on Michael's side here. You do not slap somebody, Zlatan. That's why you have a bad reputation. But Luca Petrasso received good words from his manager, Bob Bradley, over the last couple of weeks of training. What is your thought on the youngster from Canada?
Yeah, look, I mean, my overall thoughts for all the young players for Canada, sorry, that was a Freudian slip, and the rest of the rest of the country's enjoying that. But no, they're out of Toronto, is that Bob Bradley has a well-worn reputation for developing players, and particularly he develops midfielders very well. He's very technical. He's very much about space. He will drill home where to turn, how to accept a ball, how to accept a pass, how to move after you've made a pass. All that sort of stuff is stuff that Bob Bradley does very well. It's stuff that Chris Armas does very poorly. Chris Armas is all about the rah, 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 go, 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 to break it down into simple terms.
Chris Armas. Oh, you mean Ted Lasso?
Yes, Ted Lasso at Manchester United. I don't know.
I'm sorry to all my United fans listening. I apologize, but I thought it was hilarious when I first heard the comparison.
That's funny. But yeah, last year there was a noted need to play the kids, quote unquote, more and more, particularly in the midfield, where they do have a lot of players. TFC does, young players that seem like they have a lot of talent, that are well regarded by scouts, but have never really been able to break into the first team. And that under Greg Vanney is a guy that prefers veterans, and then they bring in a guy that they thought was going to play the young guys, but he couldn't teach them. He wasn't a teacher. He was more of a tactics guy, and he had a very specific tactic that he wanted to employ, and those guys didn't really fit, and they were the shed. So I'm excited about Bob Bradley. I know he's not a midfielder, but I think that he can do what he can do for them is how TFC season's going to go. I mean, obviously there's a big bomb coming into that roster in the middle of July.
Lorenzo Insigne, as of July 1st, will be a designated player for Toronto FC. He is slotted as a striker, and that will change Toronto FC's roster. Bob Bradley, though, will have a lot of coaching up, as I call to do. Until then, his record overall as a manager, 710 games managed, Duane, across competitions, countries, and of course national teams. 340 wins, 149 draws, 221 losses, for a winning percentage of 47.9%, which is not bad for a winning percent. When you add a sport that does have a three-way result possibility, a winning percent of close to 50% is pretty good. And we'll see how close to that he can come with TFC.
Yeah, and he's back with his son, too, famously. That's an interesting narrative for the season. And to wrap it back into the midfield discussion, whether Michael can get himself back up and whether Michael is willing to take a step back and allow the other players to fill their role occasionally is a big question about TFC this year, too. There's a lot of questions about TFC. I do like their spine, but anyway, to get back to Bradley, he is the most important acquisition that they've made in the offseason, and I'm including the ones that are coming in the summer, and there's more than one rumored right now, and you might even get
Criscito, just follow Fabrizio Romano, and I guess you'll know who comes in.
He's got a TFC inside right now, and they might even have enough room to bring in a little tiny Italian to come off the bench too. You never know. So there could be a much different team in the fall, which we'll talk about this in the full predictions tomorrow. If TFC can get themselves in that top 7, then there might be some teams that don't want to play them. But the problem is getting there, and the problem is holding on until they get there. And a lot of that's going to come down to Bradley and whether he can coach up the kids, because the kids are going to have to play.
Forward until July 1st, you'll have Iowa Quinola. Look, of course, those denomination of position are from Toronto's website and from Major League Soccer's website. So I know that sometimes Schaffelberg will play in the midfield, right? But they're labeled as forwards. Akinola, Schaffelberg, Ifunayashi, Achara, of course, Jakile Marshall-Ruddy, who has a great future in front of him. Same for Jaden Nelson, Jordan Peruzza, DeAndre Kerr, and Jesus Jimenez. When we look at the forwards, there's a couple of youngsters here that does represent the future of TFC, and the short-term future will be in July in Lorenzo Insigne. Yeah,
Marshall-Ruddy is the one that everyone wants to talk about. He's only 17. I think he turns 18 during the season, but he's very young. What were you doing at 17? I wasn't playing professional soccer, that's for sure.
I was not doing anything professional.
Yeah, no, I was professionally being an idiot. But anyway, Marshall-Ruddy is considered by not just me, not just Canadians, but scouts across North America to be the best prospect in his age group in North America. Not MLS, North America. We're including Mexico in that. He was a massive part of TFC winning the under-15 North American or American Championship in the development program back there a couple of years ago. He was on the roster last year, didn't get a lot of time. There's some talk that he might be a fullback this year, a wingback, I should say. So you might see him get time a little bit out of position, but what they think he is, he's more of a winger. But we're kind of having Alphonso Davies conversation when we're getting into that. So he is someone to watch up there for sure. And look, the biggest question, though, I think the most important player for TFC this year is Iowa Akinola. If Iowa Akinola can step up and return to form, and he's probably about a month out from starting, then they have a chance, because what he was on, he could do a lot of the things Josie did. And obviously Josie can't do those things anymore. And I think we're going to find that in New England soon, that he can't just do them anymore. Luckily for them, they don't need him as much as Toronto needed him. So, but if Akinola can do those kind of same qualities, and they have those offensive flair coming from the outside and from like creators that are a little bit further deep, then that's a damn dangerous team in the playoffs. But again, this is all a wait and see thing. And previewing and placing TFC in the rankings is going to be for not just me, I don't think, but it's going to be the most difficult team for me to place, because I do believe the spine's good, but I don't know whether they can stay healthy. I do believe the kids are good, but I don't know whether Bob Bradley can coach them up. I do believe that the team has a chance when they go through, if they can go through, but I don't know if that'll happen.
Yeah, it's true. And that's what we'll keep an eye on for TFC, of course, and we'll break down their schedule for this weekend tomorrow. And we look, of course, at our weekend preview and our prediction for Major League Soccer in our MLS prediction show on tomorrow, on Friday. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you don't miss the show on Friday. And also podcast. Subscribe to our podcast feed to always be notified when we have a new episode available. Let's talk about the Vancouver Whitecaps and their lineup for this year. Vancouver Whitecaps, a younger version in net for sure. Evan Newton, Thomas Hassal will be given the keys to the reign for the young goalkeeper. And Isaac Boner will be the third keeper. Their defense, a young defense, of course. Gutierrez will have some time. We'll see Jake Nerwinski continue his growth into becoming a better defender. But I doubt Vancouver will be able to replicate how they played 2/3 of last season. Let's not forget they played as basically the best team in Major League Soccer from the half of the season till the end. A bit of it was under, of course, Marc Dos Santos. Some of it was Vanni Sartini, and Sartini got the job and came back. Let's not forget the performance of Brian White, scoring 12 goals in 27 games for the Whitecaps, 23 starts. In those 12 goals, there was 9 that were expected. And that's where we want to bring this conversation. When we think about Vancouver, it's the replicability of last year's results under Sartini. Sartini was really good to bring out the intangible, the X factors, and get what we call an unexpected win. But is that replicable? Is that achievable over a season-long aspect with this roster that still has a Lucas Cavallini that hasn't produced yet? To St. Ricketts, that's not getting any younger. I love that Home. I can understand Caicedo. We'll see Ryan Gold and his continuous production. But to me, this team will go as far as Lucas Cavallini scores.
Yeah, I mean, the question with White, who's a lot of observers are very high on and think can continue on this streak, because people love a narrative and they love a hot player. But for him to outperform his XG that much again is an ask. I mean, it's possible. There are players that consistently outperform their XG. Kyle Larn is a player that consistently outperforms his XG, and part of that is how he can get a shot off very quickly. And if Brian White has those qualities, then he will prove us wrong. He'll make us look dumb. But the problem when you're trying to and great for Vancouver, because goals win games, and that's why they were winning games down the stretch. Again, defense is not the thing. However, you can't win games if you have no defense. And a big part of the defense is a player that you're not going to mention in this lineup. You're not going to mention in this build-down. You would have a month and a half ago before a shock trade happened that wasn't really in the Whitecaps' control, and that's Maxime Crepeau, who had the highest XG difference between expected goals against versus goals against. His number was the best in the league, which meant that he outperformed his expected saves better than anyone else. You had a player that outperformed his expected goals better than you would ever expect, and a player that outperformed his expected goals against.
Yeah.
Is that both those things going to happen again, especially with Thomas Hasal in goal?
Yeah. No, and you're right. And Crepeau, to me, Maxime Crepeau represents maybe 9 points during the season. I'm not even exaggerating. He's one of the best. And Duane mentioned one of the stats. There's 2 stats that explains the influence of a goalkeeper really on the team, advanced stats wise, or it's the one Duane explained, which is the expected goal versus a save, and it becomes a plus or a positive or minus. You also have the same exercise, but with points. So the result of the game, wins and draws. And at one point, Crepeau was given basically the Whitecaps 15 points on their point tally for the season. That's 5 wins, Duane. That's 5 wins influence of a player. That's a lot. And I don't think they can do that. And there's multiple reasons why Crepeau wanted out. And if you are a French speaker, francophone, I do encourage you to listen to the podcast called 11 Montreal, 11 Montréal, produced by my colleagues at TVA Sport that does talk to Maxime Crepeau earlier this week.
Fair enough. Yeah, do listen to that if you can speak en français. Look, the answer to that is no. You can't replicate that. They're not going to replicate that. But Maxime Crepeau, if his name was Max Crawford and he played in New York, he would have been the MLS Keeper of the Year last year. The Crawford part's perhaps unfair. The point is, if he wasn't Canadian and he played in a big American market, he would be Andre Blake, he would be Sean Johnson, he would be Steph Fry, he would be considered the same level. And he's in a big market this year. I'm skipping ahead to tomorrow. I think he should be and probably will be in the running for Keeper of the Year this year. And that's a big acquisition for LA. So, and it's a big loss for Vancouver. 2
starting keepers in Canada could be in the running for Goalkeeper of the Year. That's what I think. No,
there's that too. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's showing up. There's something about this kid. Talk about numbers and intangibles, and you look at James Penta. I know I'm circling back to Montreal, but maybe that tells you a lot about what I think about Montreal for tomorrow. All right. Let's finish by just looking quickly at the end of the roster for Vancouver. Midfield, we've quickly alluded to it. It'll be fun to see the continued progression of Michael Baldacimo. What will the rest of the roster do from the Raposo to the acquisition of Sebastian Berhalter a couple of days ago? That's interesting. Russell Tybert, Ricketts, of course, Lucas Cavallini, Brian White, Dahome. Those will be fun with the young Cameron Habibullah. That will be fun to keep an eye on. And, of course, the roster of Vancouver is not finished in my mind. There might be some more acquisitions this summer or more next year. It's a transition year for the Whitecaps, and the fans need to know this because otherwise they'll be shocked in a few weeks. I don't think, and here's a shocker for our prediction tomorrow, spoilers, I don't think it's going to go well for the Whitecaps.
Yeah, I mean, look, half a season is not a trend, and we've outlined two very concerning metrics that they have to outperform. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't. MLS is a funny league. We could be dead wrong. I've been dead wrong. I picked teams to well, hell, half every expert in the damn world predicted the Crew to be near the top of the Supporters Shield race last year. They didn't make the playoffs, right? Like, things happen. We could be dead wrong here, but if you look at the numbers carefully, to expect the Whitecaps to perform at the level that they performed down the stretch last year it's delusional, is what it is. They're going to have to continue to build. They're going to have to continue to do things, and a lot of the credit from last year goes to the coach, to the coaching change, and I think that's incredibly unfair to MDS because his numbers weren't that much difference between. It was just you had a guy there that had a personality, and MDS, I love him. He's got a great personality in the sense of that he's a geek of the game, but I don't think he's going to scream and make speeches in the line and like wave at the crowd and stuff like that in the same way. That's going to wear thin if they have a 5-game losing streak.
Yeah. Well, yes. Over the long haul, I'll take the student of the game over the. Well, I guess he is a student of the game too, Benny Sartini. Anyways, but yeah, that's what makes this season fascinating to me for the Whitecaps, but for different reasons than the other two Canadian teams. Yeah,
and look, and there's storylines for all three Canadian teams. The Whitecaps, can they continue that momentum? Can they shut me up? Not me particularly. I'm not that special, but can they shut people like me up? Can they continue can Brian White, who's a big story, particularly within American circles, where if you want to take this to a USMNT conversation, they don't have a striker right now. So really, the U.S. men's national team, and they're going to a World Cup, so he's going to be motivated. So can he grab that spot? Can he be the guy that does it? You wouldn't have guessed that a year ago, right?
No.
So that's a good story. There's lots of storylines there. Toronto is the old giant. Can it build itself back up with the new hero coming in? And Montreal is trying to continue that consistent build. By the way, Wilfred Nancy's outfit yesterday, he looked like he was Henry. He was Henry's little brother, he looked like. Like, it's almost like they put one to the other. It had that, like, sort of stylistic sweater vest with the, very, very, very high.
Oh.
I'm good on the uniform or
Sure.
the dress game.
And the other comparison between the two is one of them is a good coach.
Oh, well, one of them, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't know.
I didn't say who. I'm not
Henry
going
has
further. One of them is good.
Might have been the coach all along because they didn't change much when Henry left last year.
Exactly. We're wishing all the best to Thierry Henry in his return to working in France for Ligue 1 Uber Eats.
Probably. I thought the team was Uber Eats. Is there a new club called Uber Eats?
No, it's the name of the league. Yeah, it's a league. Ligue 1 Uber Eats, and he works for the league as a commentator.
I follow you now.
But on that note, Duane and I will go hit the books once again. We'll get ready for tomorrow as we give our predictions in Major League Soccer from the standings to the Golden Boot, the Shield. Duane and I tomorrow will give our prediction of the 27th season in Major League Soccer that does start on Saturday. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter at KevLarme, this show at Soccer Today SPN, and Duane at 24th Minute. We are broadcasting on YouTube Monday to Friday. Subscribe to our YouTube page at the URL youtube.com/sports podcasting network. Thank you for all the great comments on the podcast and, of course, on the video aspect. We appreciate your help. Over the next few weeks, we'll continue to work the kinks and we'll bring some better audio and continue to work towards an even better production. But as always, until next time, for Duane Wallens, I'm Kevin Laramie. Tomorrow's our prediction show. And until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.